Hello and welcome to the Art Astra podcast. I'm Emily Olson.
And I'm Alexa Erdogan.
Together we explore intersections of the arts and space studies. Today we have a special guest as we explore space in popular culture, specifically in the James Bond movies. We have with us Amanda Ohlke, Director of Adult Education at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. As a key member of the museum's creative team since 2004, she's helped develop the museum's exhibitions for reopening in 2019, with special emphasis on curating exhibitions on topics such as economic espionage, pop culture, sabotage, and terrorism. Ohlke was also heavily involved in developing the museum's Exquisitely Evil 50 Years of Bond Villains exhibit, as well as the Operation Spy immersive experience. Her recent paper on Mata Hari, titled Ripe for Recruitment, is in an upcoming anthology from the University Press of Kansas. Ohlke curates in-person public programs for the museum, including the only annual Trabant rally in the United States, surveillance workshops in the streets of DC, and the museum's robust virtual offerings. She's been a guest expert on Mysteries at the Museum several times, as well as being featured on shows and podcasts such as the recent history production, The Secret History of the Civil War. Ms. Ohlke is the former executive director of the Museum Trustee Association, where she developed director and board leadership education programs in partnership with the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University and the Getty Leadership Institute. Amanda, welcome to the podcast. We can't have a better guest to talk about this.
Well, I am so delighted to chat with you about James Bond. This makes my day and my evening.
Likewise. So, I suppose first off, there's no doubt that James Bond and the Bond universe as a whole is an international cultural phenomenon that has spanned for decades now. Why is it you think that James Bond is so popular, or even has been so popular for so long historically?
James Bond has been my constant companion throughout my life. I'm not going to divulge how old I am, but you could easily find out. And just the mirroring of what's happening in the Bond movies with what's happening in the world. It's always very timely. It's always the plots, even though outlandish, are very, very much informed about what is truly happening. What are the global concerns? Then we have the incredibly beautiful settings, places that you may have heard of, you may not have heard of, but they're so beautiful and they're inspiring. And you want to go and visit wherever he's been. You want to go to that casino. You want to stay on that island. And then just very attractive and interesting people. And although the Bond, we're all women here, the Bond girls, it is quite something, but they're diverse people and with diverse backgrounds. And even if a villain is a horrible, horrible person, they have a very unique and tragic backstory. So believe it or not, there's real emotion there. And then there's the tech and the gadgets and the vehicles.
The tech is always my favorite part. Emily and I were tagging up earlier and talking about favorite Bond experiences, and Q has a special place in my heart.
He's such a delight and always hating to hand over his amazing things to James Bond. And we know from some of the wonderful people that we work with who, really done missions in the field that, the technical services people aren't always delighted to hand over their coolest, newest thing for these folks to go out and just break, in their opinion.
That's fair given the track record, I think, of the James Bond movies, too. As we are a space and art podcast, we're specifically interested, speaking of tech, we were especially fascinated by Diamonds Are Forever, Moonraker, and Die Another Day, as each of these has an element of space. They're not the only ones, but they seem to be the ones with the most space-centric. And as you pointed out with how each Bond movie is always a product of its time, could you tell us what was going on specifically in these time periods that had to do with maybe national intelligence threats or space, or how they were influenced by their culture?
Well, the maybe I'll go backwards because Die Another Day from 2002, you could almost think, if I just told you the plot, that this is happening now because it's the focus between North Korea and the Republic of Korea. We've got a a villain who is determined to create this giant orbital satellite laser that he's going to use to slice the DMZ between, North Korea and the Republic of Korea in half, and then so that North Korea can invade and reunify the country. And I mean, North Koreans consistently in the news today, listening to the news, you'll hear what are the latest things that might be happening. So that one, it's amazing that is a lasting concern from 2002 until right up to today. So a very, very direct concern. And then I feel like with Moonraker, so working backwards in order from 1979, we've got Sir Hugo Drax, who wants to, we've got the billionaire who, my goodness, is he really as, what he seems? We can name the names of the other billionaires who we wonder what in the devil they're up to. But he's involved in space shuttle and technology, working with NASA. And of course, his plan is actually to wipe out the human race, except for his selected specimens who are going to live on a space shuttle. So in some ways, even though he's planning to wipe out the world's population, I think we're all concerned about what's happening on our planet. How do we survive? What is it like to live off world? And so I'm intrigued and inspired, growing up in the 70s, the space shuttle, very, very much in the news. People actually living in space. It still blows my mind that anybody can do that. And then the furthest back that we wanted to focus on, Diamonds Are Forever in 1971. So it's the satellites. Satellites are just big, big, big. They're what's happening out there in space. What can people do with satellites? What are their intentions? And it was interesting that this one is supposed to be a diamond-based laser satellite. And I'm wondering if I mean, diamonds are attractive. That's great for smuggling. It's a sexy concept. But then also, I think there's a linkage with the Soviet satellite program, if I'm going to say it correctly, Almaz, which
Almaz.
codename Diamond. So I think there's a lot of fun and playfulness with the people who are creating the Bond world, inspired by Ian Fleming, but then also what's happening today. And of course, the breaking news in the last 2 days here is Russia's got some kind of spacecraft that possibly will have nuclear capabilities, that possibly will wipe out communications. So satellites, this entire timeline, I bet we're going to see a satellite of that nature in the next Bond film.
Absolutely. What's really cool too about, and I love that you went backwards in time, because one of the things I was looking at when I was on a Bond marathon of all of these movies recently is that I didn't realize when it first came out, or the previous times I've seen it, that Die Another Day was made to celebrate the 40 years of James Bond. So there's so many Easter eggs in it. There's also the very ominously titled Icarus death ray that we were talking about.
I mean, who names their project Icarus? That means you're going to fail. Like, you're going to soar high, but come on, it's not synonymous with success.
No, it's not. Also, in Die Another Day, you have Gustav Graves, played by Toby Stephens, who is also this private guy who ends up being the North Korea plant. But that's also a reference to the private space billionaires in the previous iterations of space. And then also what I found really interesting about that one is we've got Halle Berry as an NSA agent. And I think it's the first time the NSA is in the Bond movies.
And NSA agent, I mean, we love Halle Berry. She's amazing. She's fabulous. She is not, she gives Bond a run for his money. She's now oh, help me, James. But it is quite a chuckle to have an NSA agent. They are not usually out there in the field wearing their bikinis with their shark daggers, but good. What they do on the weekend is I love Die Another Day, and I can give you a peek ahead of this exhibition we are going to have coming up at SPY, which is Bond in Motion. And we're going to have two cars that are related to Die Another Day. One is this amazing kind of poisonous green Jaguar that we did have on display previously at the museum. That is just wonderful, and it is driven by the villain Zhao, and this great slick slidey ice battle. And then we also have the Aston Martin Vanquish, that is this car that is supposed to be able to cloak itself with tiny cameras. And so we'll have both of those cars are reunited in this exhibition. And Q, we were saying how much we love Q. Q said, well, Aston Martin calls it the Vanquish, but we call it the Vanish because of this technology. And now that technology is how they really will cloak tanks and things in the desert, teeny tiny hexagonal camera. It's so fun that Bond is paralleling, being inspired by, and I do think sometimes perhaps inspiring reality.
Having just recently watched Die Another Day, how many of those Jaguars do you think they used for the film?
Well, we have a car from Quantum of Solace
Mhm.
that a beautiful Aston Martin that's used in this opening chase scene, and it has continuity paint. So this is because there's so much wrecking. They're going through. It is like a thrilling beginning to the movie, and I can't remember if they went through 7 or 14. I'm so bad at numbers. 7 or 14 Aston Martins, and I feel like it's 7 is sticking in my mind. And they had to paint them all so that it would keep looking like the same car as it went on. So, I mean, can you imagine how many they go through? Yeah.
Wow.
Man, oh man.
Yeah. But beautiful, beautiful stuff. And I have to say about Die Another Day that the actor who plays Gustav Graves is Toby Stevens, and he did the narration of a film we had for Exquisitely Evil. I just love his voice, and it's so wonderful. And just when you see that video, which might be on our YouTube, I'm not sure, but it's just so wonderful. His voice is so great, and he was a terrific villain.
Yes, he was fantastic. And then also going back to Moonraker, what is really interesting about that one is that Bond's Bond girl, Lois
Yes.
Childs, yeah. She is also NASA, but then it also turns out later that she's also CIA.
Yeah. Which is an
Yes.
interesting
Yeah.
double job to have.
Yeah, there is at least one astronaut, though, I think, that was former CIA and then NASA.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it doesn't seem at all impossible. And she's a fairly serious and believable person as opposed to a nuclear specialist that will just leave her alone, but from the world is not enough. But yeah, Louise Child is very good. There's another woman in that film who's very bad at her job. So they kind of still have their not great font, like,
Mhm.
I don't know what I'm doing. And I can't remember where Holly, I'm not going to say, I don't even feel like saying her name. I know it. Holly is the first name. But she plays that mess of a Bond girl character. And so I love that Louise Child is composed, has it together, has to be rescued, because it was still the 1970s, but still got to have a career and be a professional, and so that's great. And what a great villain for Moonraker. Kind of feels a little bit like one of the Bond movies that jumps the shark. You have like the minions in their matching outfits, and it's in a sacred temple that they've taken over, and a plot to kill everybody on Earth. But this billionaire, Hugo Drax, has some of the best lines ever, and engraved in my brain is his quote where he says, and I'll probably mess it up a little bit, but "You return, Mr. Bond, with the tedious inevitability of a much unloved season. I mean, it's just
Oof.
fantastic. Hugo Drax, I love you. It is so scathing, and he is so sick of James Bond. And so that elevates this crazy, crazy premise. But I thought it was fun what you had learned
Yes.
about.
Alexa, do you want, as the actual space systems engineer, do you want to give a breakdown of the 8-minute laser fight?
Oh, goodness. I was just rewatching this last night. If this is the one that I'm thinking of, it's where everybody's like EVAing around in space,
Yes.
right? With like laser pew pew noises, which is
With
very
their
fun to
turtlenecks.
watch. Yeah, completely not connected or tethered to anything, which is already increases like baseline levels of anxiety, and they're just out there floating. I mean, if you want to get into like the scientific technical details of it, if you're going to shoot a laser in space, it's probably going to kick you back a little bit, but we can dispel it for the for the sake of just like enjoying a Bond film. But yes, there's actually clips of it on YouTube. I'll put it in the show notes. But it is a fantastic, fantastic scene. And then there's also the docking of the like space shuttle-esque ship to the space station, which is really interesting how that is done too. And it makes you think about the parallel with that and the dockings that we do pretty regularly now, which is amazing that we can do that regularly now with like ISS and Dragon capsules. So it's come a long way, but also I think there's something really fun and like inspiring about these space scenes, even though it might seem like a little funny later on. There's a lot to like draw from it in terms of like creative or like scientific inspiration, I think. And I'd be interested to hear what your read is on that too, Amanda, that specific like laser gunfight.
When we had watched this film, I went down a rabbit hole about why we had an 8-minute laser fight in Moonraker. And what I found was they had been inspired, the writers and the production team of Moonraker had been inspired by Star Wars, which had just come out. And they were trying to capture that demographic, that market energy. And so they tried to make a James Bond version of Star Wars in this movie with the Space Marines? Question mark. And they all have such adorable turtlenecks with their jetpacks.
I still have trouble knowing we have Space Command. I was watching someone from Space Command on the news talking about this potential Russian spacecraft threat, and I was like, is that real? I mean, it just feels like something from one of these movies, and I'm a big sci-fi buff, and I love all this stuff, but I forget how old I am. I forget that, my first Bond movie was Live and Let Die, which I saw way too young. So, of course, when I went to see Moonraker, because I saw all of these in the movies, I had seen Star Wars, in the theater a million times. We all had. So, of course, we knew why we were seeing it. It wasn't seen on the weekend or in a binge. You're like, oh, now they've got lasers too, huh? And the movie that immediately preceded this one, The Spy Who Loved Me, it's a sort of similar plot. We've got a villain who wants to wipe out humanity and live at the bottom of the sea. This is Stromberg. And so, space, under the sea, but there's a henchman in that who's named Jaws. And he's this kind of iconic and a wonderful man, Richard Keel, who played him, this enormous guy with these titanium teeth. And Stromberg, the supervillain, has this shark tank. And then this villain with the teeth is called Jaws. And we all knew we are watching that because of the phenomenon that was Jaws. But we were traveling, I was traveling through the Bond series in real time. So all of that, it's funny to me to realize, like, you're like, oh, and I'm like, oh, we just knew that because everything for the last couple of years has been sharks, lasers, lasers, lasers. And we had a party at the Spy Museum when Exquisitely Evil was on, and it was informally called Sharks and Lasers.
Incredible.
Because they're such iconic, weapons and things that the villains are going to use to do away with people. And I should say, in this upcoming exhibition, we will have a boat. I wish we had a plane or a satellite, but we have a boat from Moonraker. But it's pretty cool because James, if you've just seen it, you know he escapes hang gliding off a boat. So we have the boat with the hang glider. So that is really neat. And I got to help carry the hang gliding part of it around when we were loading the cars, and it was kind of in the way. So it's this very long hang glider. So okay, now I've carried James Bond's hang glider. That was fun.
That's so cool.
That's incredible. I was so excited when we reached out to you, and then we learned that the James Bond in Motion exhibition was happening. I'm so excited to get to see it. I know it opens March 1st, so it will have opened by the time this episode drops. Because I also loved the Exquisitely Evil exhibition.
That's why I have so many of these things. I had to work on so many of the videos for that. And we were just doing these villain montages and scene montages. So I had to just watch them and watch them and watch them and clip scenes, because people will say, how do you know that? It was scorched on my soul. But I will, if one of these, or if I'm just cleaning the house and you realize they've got a marathon going, I'm like, oh, fabulous. That's great. There's so many favorite moments. And that's what you kind of like, the iconic moments. One of my colleagues, Shauna, always says, I don't like watching them, but I love when you tell me about what happens. Because when they're long, but then you hit the high points, and you're like, and then, the villain escapes this way, or, James Bond enters across the ski slopes. So pretty great stuff.
Yeah, we had a bit of a similar moment too, because Emily watched the one with the diamonds in the satellite, and she sent me, I'm going to expose you a bit, Emily, if this is okay.
Yeah, go for it.
She sent me a voice message. She was like, so there's like cassette tapes involved they just like pulled out a cassette tape. Like, I don't know how this is feasible. You're the engineer here. Can you is this real? And I went down a rabbit hole that day of just like cassette storage. Can you put like command responses in a cassette storage tape? Because I know they did it for like video games back in the day, but it was one of those things where it's like, this movie sounds so much more fascinating hearing somebody else explain all of these scenes to you. And sometimes it's like, I'd rather just hear you explain it, because it sounds wild versus watching it first.
Well, what did you find out, Alexa? I'm buying it as someone who grew up with, cassette tape. I'm imagining that it was real.
Yeah, so if there's somebody who's like a computer science expert who's listening, feel free to correct me. But I do think, because they did do that for video games back in the day, like during the early development, where you could actually have like a programmable, essentially, like physical cassette tape that was much larger. I think it was like Atari that was using it. So I think it seems feasible. My only concern would be, I don't think it would necessarily be safe if you have like software code for your satellite on a cassette tape that you just yank out and switch with another one. There might be a continuity error there.
Yeah. I feel like you also can't, constantly diffuse things just by sliding a cylinder out of something. But, many kudos for getting these plots together and trying to tie it up. Diamonds Are Forever. Our friend Blofeld, were you amused by his great wrecking ball scene where he's in a little sub?
Yes. Yes, when he's in the sub and then they just move. Yeah, they use the sub like a wrecking ball around. That was the other thing I thought was really interesting too, because as Alexis referenced, the fact that they have this like oil rig set up to be essentially the center of command operations for the satellite. And then he's trying to escape in the sub and they're just using it as a wrecking ball, as if that's also not going to jeopardize the satellite or anything else in space.
Don't worry about it.
And that's a very pointed comment by me, because we have the little Batha sub is part of the Bond in Motion. This little tiny mini sub might be one of my favorite things that's in the show.
Is it suspended? in the gallery?
No, well, we're still, but I don't think it's going to be suspended. We have a watery corner.
Ooh,
There's a watery corner. We have a sub from For Your Eyes Only, a Neptune sub. There might be a shark surprise that no spoilers, Emily, but you might remember a very famous shark surprise from Exquisitely Evil. Might be coming back.
I'm so
And
excited.
yeah, and then the little bathtub. So it's kind of fun. We have a little bit of water. We have we have air, but no satellites. We do have satellites in the museum, as Emily knows, but not really anything in the Bond show. Although he's got more than his share of satellites in the films.
That's fair. Well, the other thing too, jumping around a lot, back to Die Another Day, was because it's that kind of Easter egg time capsule of all the different James Bond films. There were a lot of parallels I saw drawn in my, again, just rabbit hole research of how the Icarus satellite death ray is inspired by the death ray that they've got going on in The Man with the Golden Gun, and how that was in its time inspired by the energy crisis. And so just the fact that these anxieties keep getting repackaged, but also just deployed in different ways to speak to new anxieties, is just so interesting to me.
Off topic, but not off the Bond topic, but Live and Let Die, my favorite, because the first one I saw in the theaters. But I mean, this is a drug kingpin in that one. So it's all issues with drugs and villain who is a soul food entrepreneur, but also a dictator of a Caribbean island. There is voodoo. I mean, it's so interesting what gets folded together. But that one is just, we struggled with that because it's such an amazing movie with amazing villains. And when we were putting Exquisitely Evil together all those years ago, because it's not intelligence. James Bond really gets way out of the lane of just intelligent, and we're like, this is kind of drug enforcement here, or drug smuggling. It's kind of funny. You're like, wait, he's a spy. What is he again? So it's interesting, but it's reflecting what the issues were. And when you get into the Timothy Dalton, that's a really dark period of the Bond movies, and you've got violent villains. I mean, they're all violent, but they're kind of more like, I'll kill all of humanity, but not just this savage gangster kind of feeling. They're always more like, you're boring me. That's why I haven't killed you yet. So and that's reflective, I think, of the times. Interesting, they even one of the Timothy Daltons, The Living Daylights, they have the whole working with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. It's quite impressive how many, important moments of the last 50, 60 years that they have managed to pull into a franchise that is a fantasy.
Well, that's the thing too with Diamonds Are Forever. We've got 1971. Alexa and I were talking recently about Apollo 17, and in Diamonds Are Forever, that other, I think it's an iconic scene where he's using as a getaway vehicle like a prototype of a moon buggy, and it's never referenced again. He just drives it off. But
Beautiful.
Nice.
yeah, it's not conspicuous at all. But but Willard White, the billionaire who Blofeld is impersonating, technically, he crashes this secret base where they're doing all of this moon research and testing of prototypes for future moon missions. And they've got like the people dressed up in the spacesuits moving really slowly for no apparent reason because they are definitely still on Earth. And that's how he escapes. Yeah. That's how he escapes in the moon buggy.
We touched on like a little bit throughout talking about different types of like favorite movies or villains. Do you happen to have like a favorite Bond or a favorite Bond movie or like even a favorite Bond villain?
I really do have a favorite Bond villain. I loved when I saw that question, and it's so funny working on that exhibit. We were just steeped in all the Bond. I definitely have a favorite Bond woman, but there's only one character I've ever had a dream about, and it was Alec Trevelyan, who is the Golden Eye villain played by Sean Bean. And he is so great. And he just really, James thought they were besties and they were not. And so I don't know. The acting was so great, and Trevelyan's moving around in his special motorized armor-plated train in that movie, which they actually did in Russia, in the Russian Revolution. They no idea. It's never too old or too new for the Bond franchise to include it. So I don't know why, but he really stuck in my head. I really, really loved him. And I've grown to love all the Bonds. Was not a Dalton fan at all, but a dear coworker. It's funny. He was her Bond. That was the Bond when she was growing up. And so she made me enjoy him more. So my Bond is Roger Moore, because he's the one that I grew up with.
That's incredible. I'm so happy that you mentioned Sean Bean and Alec Trevelyan, because we were thinking about including GoldenEye in this because of the Arecibo location.
Yes, I was sort of shocked it wasn't on the list. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because we were thinking we had so many to talk about originally, and then we tried to narrow it down.
Narrow it down. But it's very watchable. I think GoldenEye is very, there are ones that you're like, not so watchable, but I think GoldenEye is a watchable film.
Yeah, it's so fun. And I agree. I think that whole sequence, that relationship between just the bestie relationship, you don't get to see a lot. And it makes it more poignant when the betrayal happens.
Betrayal makes a good villain.
Yeah.
And I think one of my favorite women is Michelle Yeoh. This amazing, she's supposed to be a Chinese intelligence officer. And she and Pierce Brosnan fighting over control of motorcycle. She is as tough or tougher than he is. And that was so great, because you kind of see this as you watch all the movies. You'll see like women, a step forward where they're like, it's parody, they're as tough, they're as knowledgeable, there's everything. Then we'll revert to like hot pants and, I don't know what I'm doing. So it's fun to watch that interplay, like, oh, that didn't test that well. Maybe we'll go back to just a hot chick. So anyway, but I love her. It's so great that she's just had this incredible ongoing career.
Mm-hmm.
People are like, wait, she was a Bond girl, like at work? Really? I'm like, oh yeah.
Well, that's the thing too. It's like my favorite is Casino Royale, I think, because that was my first James Bond movie in theaters with Daniel Craig, and then Mads Mikkelsen as the chief, who I mean, I adore Mads Mikkelsen. I'll watch him in anything. So I'm heavily biased there, but also Vesper Lind, like Eva Green. I just love her so much. Casino Royale is mine.
That is a magnificent movie. I've seen that movie so many times. It is so good. It is heartbreaking. I just love it. The parkour scene, like, just sign me up. I'll watch that over and over again. We used to have Le Chiffre's inhaler on display that always cracked me up. I'm like, all we have is his inhaler. But yeah, Mikkelsen, he was a great villain with his bloody teeth. Just great stuff. Great stuff. I love Casino Royale. What about you, Alexa? Do you have any favorites? Is this all just,
yeah, I really like that one too. Something about like, I'll watch Eva Green in like almost anything. I love her too. I really liked Skyfall. I think mostly for just like the scenery, and it just felt like a little bit different. Like, I'm not as much of like a Bond connoisseur, but from the few that I have seen over the years as I was growing up, it had like a bit of a different mood to it that I was like, oh, okay, I can kind of get behind this. And yeah, just like the cinematography, everything was so beautiful to me.
I always think, I'll say that. I always have these quotes that I just to amuse myself. And I'll just say, if someone's trying something and then we do it the way we were doing before, I'll just say, sometimes the old ways are the best, which is just a line from that movie where they're going to go get a gun or something to shoot somebody. And I know I'm quoting a James Bond movie. And I have to shamelessly say we have a motorcycle from Skyfall that will be in the exhibition. So
Yes, absolutely. The other one that I really, really love of like the older movies is Doctor No, but because it's the original, but also the first time I watched all of the James Bond movies in their entirety, I was actually, this is a little bit off topic, but it is James Bond. Um, Doctor No was really interesting to me when I was in an art crime program because it's credited in a way we were talking about earlier with the private space billionaires as the Bond villain. That archetype was kind of invented in these movies. And similarly, even before that, Dr. No was the very first James Bond movie, obviously, to hit any of the theaters or just to be made in general. And Dr. No established the archetype of the criminal collector, of the Bond villain who steals or commissions the theft of paintings, because the Duke of Wellington portrait by Goya had been stolen from the National Gallery of Art 2 weeks before filming began. And the production team decided, wouldn't it be fun if this painting was in the lair? The museum agreed to let them do this. So it's in Dr. No, and that's why we get that fun shot of like zooming in on the painting, which similarly to your point earlier, Amanda, of like if you're not aware of the context, it just seems like a weird thing for them to focus on. Just like this specific painting.
I mean, that was such a thing of those movies of the 60s that it was shorthand. Just that, you'd see someone, you're like, oh, that's all like stolen masterpieces. Whether you recognize or not, that was just like, you're a villain, you have stolen masterpieces, in your collection. And it's so interesting. And it's such an iconic look, or you have your fake French chateau, but it's filled with these things that are should be in a museum and probably were until you took them. In Die Another Day, Gustav Graves is into fencing. And I think it's the blue boy
I think so.
that gets sliced in a sword fight. And we had that painting on display as part of Exquisitely Evil.
You had the film set piece, not the painting.
But it is fun that they love to throw these, like, if you're interested in art, you're like, that's a real master. Yeah, I mean, it's not real, it's prop, but it's so fun. They really throw a lot of bones. If you're a travel junkie, they go to these places. You're like, oh, Piz Gloria, or, oh, Sardinia, or, wherever it is. Or if you know art, you're like, oh, that's a real painting. But that's such a great and interesting connection to that it had just recently been stolen.
Absolutely. And then by the time Dr. No hit theaters, the painting had not actually been recovered yet. So it re entered public consciousness, specifically tied to James Bond, specifically the villain. And then there's an Easter egg. Well, the whole reason why my mind went down this path to begin with is that there's an Easter egg in Skyfall, in that the Modigliani painting that Severine is showing to a client, that painting is a reference to a real life Modigliani painting that was stolen. And unfortunately, I don't think that painting was ever recovered. I'll double check, but I think the authorities suspected that it had been destroyed. And then similarly, in Spectre, there's a reference to stolen art in Blofeld's volcano lair. The Picasso painting in one of the random hotel-esque rooms that James Bond gets placed in, that's a copy of a Picasso painting that was stolen in real life.
It's such an interesting thread that they have carried through, and so fun if you're interested in art. It's cool to keep it in the public consciousness too.
Yeah, and then that's what's so interesting too about James Bond, that these books and these movies are this product of all of the cultural anxieties. Space, art,
lasers.
we've got it all. Yeah, sharks.
Arts.
With the public announcement of the James Bond exhibition that we've been talking about as a kind of through line throughout this entire conversation, which has been so much fun, is there anything else that you'd love to tell us or that you can tell us about in this exhibition?
It is going to open on March 1st, and you can visit just that. If you've already been through the museum, you can just go directly to see these wonderful craft vehicles and boats and crafts, or you can go in a combo ticket together with the main museum, and we'll have some fun events. So if you watch our website, you might get, see a chance to come on a special evening. And, don't you really want to have a martini while you gaze at an Aston Martin? I know. I do.
Perfect night.
Yes, for sure. And then you've mentioned the website. We'll definitely include the website in our show notes. Where else can people go online to find you, to find Spy, especially if they can't make it to DC? But we've mentioned your beautiful virtual programs and upcoming events. Where are the best places for people to find these?
Yeah, yeah. The Spy Museum has a YouTube channel, and then all sorts of serious and less serious programming there. We also have terrific Spycast podcast series, and you can listen to those on our YouTube channel, but also on Cyberwire. You can get the full catalog of our podcasts and quite dazzling guests and content.
Amazing. Thank you so, so much, Amanda, for taking the time to talk to us this evening.
Yeah, we really appreciate your time and your insight, especially. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for your flexibility, too.
Oh, so fun to talk to both of you. Nice to meet you, Alexa and
Yeah.
Emily. You're not get away from me this easily.
I'll be coming to the exhibition. You'll see me in DC.
Good. Fair enough.
That's all we have for this episode. If you'd like to learn more about the International Spy Museum and all of their exhibitions, check out their website at www.spymuseum.org. They're also on Instagram, Facebook, X, and YouTube. We'll be sure to have links to their socials in our show notes. As Amanda mentioned, the International Spy Museum also have their own podcast called Spycast, available wherever you get your podcasts.
If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to follow us on your podcast platform of choice and leave a review while you're there. We're also on socials at Art Astra Podcast. Show notes and transcriptions for each episode are always available on our website at www.artastra.space.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.